The COVID-19 pandemic has had an unprecedented effect on Indian businesses, more so the SMEs and startups. There's been a survey that's been released by FICCI and the Indian Angel Network that surveyed around 250 startups, and they've tried to gauge this unprecedented impact of the COVID-19 on startups. We'll put out some of that information on our screen, but we have a panel to discuss this impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. Naina Lal Kidwai, the former president of FICCI, is with us on the broadcast. We also have Ajay Chaudhary, the chairman of the FICCI Startup Committee and the founder of HCL. We also have Shashank Kumar. He's the co-founder and CEO of Dehat, which is an agri-tech startup. I want to begin this conversation with you, Shashank. How has this period been? Of course, the survey has found that there are 70% startups that are actually adversely impacted because of the COVID-19 pandemic. It's not just startups. SMEs, of course, have been impacted, but all businesses really have been impacted. But, let's talk about startups. How has it been for you?
Sure. So, see, in this situation, I think everyone across India is impacted. If I talk about digital startups, yes, of course, most of the startups are impacted because of the limited mobility, because of the financial resources, apparently because the supply chain was broken, and I can go on and on. But yes, startups are known for fighting resilience. And in 3 months, the best part is that the new normal has been already set up, where team, despite of not being together, but team has been working 24/7. If I talk about our startup case of Dehat, it's related to food and ag, where we are working with farmers to provide them bunch of agricultural services. So so impact has been mixed, but we coped up very well. The overall impact now is slightly upside. To generalize, of course, it varies from sector to sector. So food and ag is probably the least impact sector, but at the same time, there are other sectors which got impacted very bad.
All right, Naina Lal Kidwai, if I can come to you, 70% startups have been impacted, and of course, several findings of this survey are not very encouraging. But among them, the real concern also is that 30% startups have started laying off people, and 43% are doing salary cuts to the tune of 20 to 40%. This isn't just happening with startups. This is happening everywhere. They're either job cuts or they are salary cuts all over the country at the moment. How do you think we can recover from a situation like this?
Well, that's clearly dependent on each company, each sector in terms of the attention it gets. I think in the startup space, what's to my mind the most worrying is the cash reserves, because the figures as we see them are 38% of the startups have said that they only have cash reserves for their organizational fixed costs to support 1 to 3 months, and 19% have only 0 to 1 month of cash reserves. So over half, 57% run out of money in 3 months. Now, unless they have the money to run, and they're doing this despite the salary scale backs and cutbacks, I do fear that unless a helping hand is given very, very quickly to them,
right,
there can only be a situation of them shutting down or more layoffs. And if you look deeper into the survey, the other aspect of funding which comes from investors and investor communities, you see the stress where a lot of the investor support is either on hold, where investors are waiting to watch and see what happens, or indeed have withdrawn. So there is a crisis there which we absolutely need to look at quickly.
Well, absolutely. And Ajay Chaudhary, what would you like to say, at a point when it comes down to startups, it's actually a question of survival. They're stressed for survival at the moment. What would be the advice that you'd give them?
Very clearly, you need to look at the definition of startups. Don't look at the big startups, Paytm, etc., etc. They're very well funded. What you need to look at is the 0 to 25 crore type of companies. Those are the startups that are really, really struggling. And as the survey shows, 12% are pretty much dead, 20% are in ICU, and the rest will be going there pretty soon. So I think the real issue here is that they're desperately short of working capital, and that's where they need a lot of help. And maybe some tax reliefs can be given, government procurement can be opened up for them. And the investors in India, frankly, don't get any tax relief if they invest in a startup, unlike the UK and all other countries. So I think that's a very major piece that's missing. And that's why you find is that the investors are not funding them at this moment, because they're all waiting. And a lot of them are so concerned that whether these companies will survive at all. Now you look at countries like the UK, they came out with a 1.25 billion pound support program for startups. And I've invested in a UK startup, and pretty much in 4 weeks, we got 300,000 pounds and so on. So if you look at Germany, there's a 2 billion euro fund. US has a 350 billion paycheck protection program. So those are the kind of things that other countries have done, and we have actually not even started.
Right. Nainalal Kidwai, would you agree? Structural reforms, I mean, we talk a lot about, social reforms and welfare measures. That's been, the prime focus. No surprises there, given the kind of crisis we've seen in the country in the last 3 months. But do you believe structural reforms of the kind Mr. Chaudhary are suggesting is perhaps the only way out in this situation?
Well, it's certainly one of the way outs, but I was quite struck by what sounds like a plea which is very easy for us to resolve, and that is the survey is saying what are the relief measures that are being sought by these startups. 25% are saying purchase orders from government to have a payment cycle of 30 days.
Right.
That's pretty reasonable. 20% are saying give us our tax refunds. 15% are just saying payment on time. Now, this is their birthright.
Right.
So why is it difficult for us to ensure that the money that they have earned and is due them be released on time? They're not even asking for SOPs or subsidies. And then to Ajay's point that of course we should be, not when we give that helping hand, look at how we can ensure that this startup universe, which was really coming along quite well, it was part of a very significant program of government. We had a lot of young and seasoned business people entering this space. And if we want to keep this startup culture in the country going, we have to make sure that they don't wither away every time there is a shock in the system, because there will be shocks.
Yes.
They have to have cushions that we provide, which allows them to bounce right back.
Very interesting. The startups shouldn't wither away because there will, of course, be shocks. But Ajay Chaudhary, if I could just give you the last word here. The other big problem that this survey highlights, and I said this at the very outset, is the job problem. It's not just the big companies that are laying off people, but even startups will look, of course, to downsize in desperate times. How do we navigate a way out of this? We're staring at an unprecedented job crisis. We just put out those figures in terms of, how our economy is going to contract. These are government projections. What's the way out?
So actually there are around 50,000 startups and they employ close to 2 lakh people. And pretty much I would feel that 1 lakh would have lost their jobs, because lots and lots of startups have already laid off people. And the real issue here, as I said, was some kind of a working capital help or paycheck protection program, the way the US have done. Those are the kind of things that are required, because they just do not have the money to pay their salaries. They don't have the money to pay their rents. I've been advising many startups, just get out of your rental accommodation, start working from home, reduce your rents, reduce this, reduce that. But you can't work on denominator management. You've got to do something more than that. And I think the real danger is that we are going to lose a generation of innovative companies.
Right. Shashank, do you want to quickly come in? Has a lot of this conversation resonated with you? This is perhaps, daily battles. You're in agri-tech, so not so badly off. The agricultural sector is surviving. Many would say the only sector that's thriving. But, what would you like to say as closing comments? You resonate with a lot of these ideas?
Sure. No, certainly, I think I would agree with the panel that right policy level change, that will certainly build cushion for the startup fraternity. And that will help all the startup or most of the startups to maximize the runway, because that's the blanket advice to each and every startup in this situation, just to maximize your runway, rationalize your cost, don't focus on your growth. Whatever you have, it's better to control the current status of milestone in a right way. So the right policy reforms is very much needed. But again, I'll circle back what I said, that that I think it's been 3 months, and startups, in fact, every next day, we all are trying to find the best possible way to come out of this scenario in terms of some new product innovation,
Yes.
new category of services, new pivot, or the most effective way how we can survive. And I think that's why entrepreneurs are needed in this society.
Well, absolutely. Entrepreneurs, you have innovation in your bloodstream. You're extremely courageous, and we hope that you tide over these times as well. Thank you so much, all of you, for sparing the time to talk about something that's so important and impacts really so many people out there, not just entrepreneurs, but also prospective entrepreneurs. Thank you very much.